Hello and welcome to the New England Job Show, a show produced by job seekers for job seekers. Today we revisit a very topical subject, that of the resume. Our guest, Randy Bussin, is a career reinvention strategist. She holds the REACH Certified Personal Brand and Online Identity designations. She's the founder of Aspire, that's her company and her website. She partners with successful individuals, helping them find more meaningful work and also to help them reignite their professional passion. Randy guides clients to a renewed sense of direction, an actionable career reinvention, and most importantly probably a personal branding plan. Randy has changed careers twice herself, working in high-tech and higher education, and of course she is a serial entrepreneur. Randy, according to you, reinvention can be several things. You've said it can be a new career, a role more aligned to one's values, an entrepreneurial pursuit based upon a passion, or even a retirement game plan. Tell us more about your philosophy.
I totally believe that reinvention is possible for anyone at any time. But as with anything in life, you need a plan. If you're going to reinvent and switch from one field to another, as in my case, from high-tech sales and marketing to career counseling, you can't do that without a plan and some thinking ahead. So for me, the most important part of a reinvention plan or a strategy is the first phase where you actually, what I like to do with my clients is to get them off the treadmill where they're spinning, 200 miles an hour, get them to spend some time in self-reflection and to think, what do I want to get out of this new career? What are my passions? What are my goals? What are my interests? For me, that's the most important part.
Right. And I'm going to get this question out of the way right up front. Is one ever too old to reinvent oneself?
Personally, I don't believe so, and I've had clients in their late 60s come to me and say, I'm ready to retire, but I'm not ready to stop working, and I want to completely do something different. So I had an investment banker, and he had been an investment banker for 20 years and wanted to do something more meaningful and fulfilling. So I don't think there's ever, there's a question of time or being too old.
Right. I think the starting point is obviously the resume. I mean, that is a reflection of who you are and how you set forth. So why is the resume important?
Well, I think the resume is important for a couple of reasons. If you're a job seeker, the purpose of the resume is to get you an interview. And the purpose of the interview is for you to tell your story and articulate the value you can bring to the employer and to really demonstrate your brand so that they want you so much that they'll offer you a job. So the purpose of the resume is to get you an interview.
And so we all make these mistakes of not knowing what to put where or how much to put, how long it should be. There are obviously rules and guidelines. What are the most important things to keep in mind when writing your resume?
Well, I think there's three things to keep in mind when you're preparing a resume. The first is, what's your strategy? If you're a career changer, your resume strategy is going to look different than if you're looking for a job. So let's take an example. If you're a salesperson and you're looking for another job as a salesperson, that's a different resume than if you're a salesperson and you're changing a job and you want to become a school teacher. So the first thing is, what's my strategy? Who's the target market that I'm trying to attract? And then the resume needs to map to that. The second is, what's your positioning or perception? How do you want to be perceived by your target market? So if you're a salesperson, there are certain attributes and words that you might want to use that would be different than if you were a sales leader. If you're a sales leader, you more likely want to be perceived as a leader who can inspire sales teams and train salespeople, versus a salesperson, maybe you want to be perceived as someone who can bring in revenues. Right. So knowing the positioning. And then you have to merchandise yourself. The product is you, so you have to sell yourself in the resume.
Right. You were talking about certain words. I mean, you're obviously referring to key words, which recruiters or hiring managers would be scanning for, right? The keywords that kind of...
Yes, it's two things. It's keywords and then it's personal brand. So what I was talking about is, what is your personal brand? And that needs to be incorporated in the resume. What is highly differentiated and compelling about you that you want your target audience to know? If if your hiring manager is a VP of sales, what is your brand and your uniqueness that you want to have come across? You want that in the resume. You also want to have keywords in the resume so that when resume, scanning systems
Right.
are used, that they can pick up on those.
A lot of us job seekers are obviously applying for as many jobs as we can and trying to tailor our resumes and have different versions of them. Is that in fact what we should be doing?
Yes, absolutely. So if you are, for each job target that you're going after, you should have a different resume. So if you're a salesperson and you're applying for sales jobs, you'll have a resume for sales jobs, another resume for sales management jobs, another resume for marketing.
Right. And then what about tailoring it even further to the very specific job that you're applying for? If you notice that they're looking for people with X, Y, and Z skills, should you be pushing those up or really focusing on those?
Absolutely. So if through informational meetings and through your networking connections, you find that a company is looking for particular skills or they have a particular culture and your personal brand and your attributes fit with that, then you want to tweak it. It doesn't take 25 minutes to tweak a resume. It's maybe only changing 10 words, but those 10 words could totally change the positioning.
Right. So are you a believer in the cover letter?
Absolutely. I do believe in cover letters. I think you should have one. It's another way for you to express your personal brand, to demonstrate the value, talk about some of your accomplishments. And my experience from talking to recruiters and HR folks is that 50% of the time they are read.
Okay, well that's good to know. Always good to know the numbers. What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen, obviously, over the years dealing with so many people, the mistakes that people make in their resumes?
So yes, it's a good point because there are a lot of mistakes. So I think the first one is that people try to tell their whole story in the resume. And I see 3, 4, 5, 6-page resumes. Nobody is going to read a 6-page resume. Even in this day and age, you're lucky if someone will glance at a 2-page resume. Hiring managers are reading resumes on wireless devices, BlackBerries, iPhones, no more than 2 pages. It should be a teaser. So first thing is way too long. Second thing is there's no brand in the resume. It's really flat. Resume starts off with highly accomplished X with 15 plus years experience in Y, a fantastic team player. I see that on every single resume. It is not differentiating. It is not compelling. It is not unique. And you're not going to grab a hiring manager's attention with that. Right. You have to know what your personal brand is, and you have to get that expressed on the resume right up front.
And typically, how long should that branding statement be?
I usually have the branding part of the resume, like the top third, the career profile. That whole piece is the brand.
Followed by highlights or your strengths, or
you can have a section called highlights of accomplishments. Right. So if a particular job seeker has repeated accomplishments in their career, you could highlight those, and then you would follow with your professional experience.
Right. What we're saying basically is that the resume is your branding statement or your personal marketing statement. What then do you think within that really catches a hiring manager or a recruiter's eye?
In the branding statement?
Yes, you talked about being creative and making it stand out. Can you give us some examples of what might really grab someone's attention? Yeah,
I think the key with the personal branding statement on the resume and the profile is to really demonstrate what your uniqueness is and what your niche is. So for instance, I have a client I've been working with. She's a chief marketing officer in financial services. Well, there's a million of those. Right. But her niche is the ability to recruit and retain high net worth clients. So that's sort of her uniqueness. That's got to be right up in the front of the profile in bold. She happens to be a very good team leader, has led teams of 90 plus people, very ethical and fair. Those are some of her characteristics. You want to get that in there.
There is debate over how long. Obviously 6 pages is too long, but perhaps for an older person who's been in a profession for a long time, who cannot fit it in on 1 page or maybe not even 2, how far can you really push your past achievements, and how far back should you go?
Well, in general, on a resume, you should not go back more than 15 years with detail. The rest of that should be in an early career section. Okay. Personally, my resume is 2 pages, and I have over 30 years experience. I would never go to a 3-page resume.
Recently, someone said she spent 20 seconds on a resume. And that, when you're a job seeker, is pretty scary. It's like, well, I'm just getting lost in the pile.
It's about 15 seconds. That's what I tell people, which is why that career profile section, the top third of the resume, the career profile, the branding piece is so important, because that's pretty much the only thing the hiring manager is going to read. They look at that. They look at where you went to school, and they look at your last job, and they scan the dates. And that's it, 15 seconds.
Right. Wow. Okay, so along with the resume, of which we could talk about, for much longer, what other tools do you think, or do in fact complement the resume for those who are in the job search?
Absolutely have to be on LinkedIn. That's a given. It is a little bit different than a resume. On LinkedIn, I suggest that people do go back more than 15 years. Because if a recruiter on LinkedIn is looking for someone that has experience working for a company, they may keyword that in, and that will come up.
Right.
So definitely LinkedIn, other social media sites depending on what your job target is. So that would be Facebook, it would be Twitter. You could use Visual CV, which is a website that has more visual components to a resume. It could be a video bio.
This brings me to the next point. Now, there is a debate right now, and the New England Job Show, we're kind of at the forefront of the whole debate about using video or visual resumes. So there is this debate over the use of the video and even photos. Now, in an increasingly visual world, what is your take on putting a face to a resume?
Personally, I would not put a photo on a resume. That's not what's done here in the U.S. That's done more in Europe. However, there are organizations and companies that produce video resumes. If I were looking for a job, I would definitely have one done. I would figure out what my personal brand is first, and then I would use the visual component to express my brand in a way that would be compelling to my target audience. Personally, I would spend the money and have it done.
But I would say that one has to be very confident about how you might come across. For instance, personality is the main thing you want to express. So if you're more of an introvert and if you don't, you could be doing a disservice to yourself. That's my point. So don't you think it's up to the individual to figure out whether they think it might work for them or not?
Yes, I would agree with you. If you're really shy and you're not comfortable, that may not be appropriate.
Right.
You could certainly hire a speaking coach. There are individuals who coach on speaking and public presentations, and that might be something you might want to do. But I think it's up to the individual.
Is there a protocol about the discrepancies that might occur when you have these various versions floating around? Is that an issue?
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, everyone knows that you can only have one version on LinkedIn, and it's common knowledge that people tweak their resumes. It is slightly different on LinkedIn. It should be written in the first person. So I, that's the way you should be writing a LinkedIn profile versus a regular resume. But I don't think, personally, I have an issue with the discrepancies.
Okay. Now, we find that many people who are unemployed right now are doing volunteer work for many reasons. But the issue is, how does one account for this or depict volunteer work in your resume? Because this is work of tremendous value. We're not getting paid for it, but we're providing professional services, and we are, doing wonderful work. How do you recommend one accounts for that?
Yes, really good question. And of course, it depends. So it all goes back to, what are you trying to accomplish with the resume? If the work that you're doing here is relevant to the job that you're seeking, you might actually want to put it at the top of the resume. If it's not, then you might want to put it in the bottom of the resume. So I'll give you an example. When I switched careers from high-tech sales and marketing into career counseling, I was doing volunteer pro bono work at a business school. And I hadn't put it on my resume. And then I decided to put it on my resume. I put it at the top of page 1 because it was relevant to the target market. I was going for a job in an MBA career center. So yes, you should have it on your resume. Where you put it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish with the resume. It could be in a separate section called volunteer leadership, or it could be your professional experience.
Exactly. I think the trick is, do you use the word volunteer or not? Do you just state what you're doing but not necessarily say it's volunteer? I think that's probably where people struggle sometimes too.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's never that black and white. It depends. It depends on what you're applying for. If you're a videographer for the New England Job Show and you're applying for a job in that field, I would just list it as professional experience, and I wouldn't state that it's volunteer unless somebody asked.
Right. Now to the topic of reinventing yourself, and it all revolves around the resume and how you present yourself. If I were to come to you, or any one of us were to come to you and say, look, I need to reinvent myself, I need to be somewhere different, how would you start? What would be your initial advice? How would you start the process?
Yep, good question. So reinvention is a process, and I'm very clear on that with people. It's not
It's not overnight.
It's not overnight. It's not like you can go for 2 sessions and get it figured out. It's usually a 3-month process. The most important part is that first part. And that's where I would start with people and getting clarity around what are you looking for at this point in terms of rewards, what are your interests, what are your values, your goals, your passions, your behavioral style, how you communicate, and getting clarity on that. Once we got clarity on that, then we can brainstorm together different career possibilities for you moving forward. But it is a process.
Coming back to the resume then, you have a client who's at this point of time with this resume. Now they've reinvented themselves, they've got to have a new resume.
That's right.
How does that work?
So that's completely different. So if you're a biology professor and now you want to be a medical writer, well, your job target is different. So you need to completely revamp your resume and write your resume to focus on what are the things you did as a biology professor that are applicable to medical writing. So it's focusing on all the writing you did, the editing, the cross-team collaboration. So it's completely different revamp.
Now, do you find that people often have many skills, talents, capabilities that are not in their resume simply because you don't realize that you kind of take it for granted. You don't realize that, well, this is a skill actually, and I've been doing it all my life, but I don't count it as one of my skills, you know? So that's the whole expression of self-confidence, that I do know how to do this.
Yes, and that happens a lot. So when I'm working with folks on their resumes, oftentimes I will ask them questions about things they've done in the past. And it comes out anyways in the work we're doing and during the personal branding process. And I find all these amazing things about them that are not on their resume, that should be on their resume. You know, leadership positions they've had or volunteer roles where they've made a significant impact. It's all part of the message.
Right. Because don't you feel that people often underestimate themselves? And I think possibly in a period of unemployment like many of us are in now, this is the time you take to reassess yourself where you're at and where you should be going. And as I think many of us on this show, for instance, realize, well, we do have all these other talents and skills which may have been lying dormant, but now it takes a certain situation to bring them up again. So what do you have to say about building self-confidence, which is perhaps an issue for a lot of people?
It's an issue for, I'd say, 80% of my clients. And what I find is when clients go through the process of working with me, they start to see things about themselves that they hadn't seen, and invariably their self-confidence will start to increase. So it's part of, I think it's just a secondary part of the process.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Your job certainly sounds fascinating, and if we use you as an example of someone who's succeeded in reinventing themselves, then I think there's hope for all of us.